Welcome back to VidBITS, which I've been kind of thinking a little bit as the alternative where tidbits we tell you about things. When VidBITS we can show you things as the show part of the show and tell, because sometimes it just doesn't work as well to try to in text and maybe with some screenshots show things. And today I've got a particularly interesting thing I want to show, or it's not a thing, but a lot of things. Matt Sephton, who we met on Tidbits Talk, is a regular there and provides a lot of useful assistance to people on the forum. Wrote to me and said he had a bunch of apps that he had worked up over the years, and would I be interested in taking a look? And so I go and I'm thinking, oh, okay, a couple of apps. What is it? I go and there's 18. And so I was like, oh wow, I'm not going to be able to really write it coherently about 18 apps. And then I started poking at them, and they're all these cool little software tools and toys where I just had to ask what the stories were. So this was clearly not something that was going to be just a simple, oh, I can review this app. It was going to be, let's chat about this and see what they do. Hopefully Matt can demo some of them to the extent that they demo. But first, Matt, can you tell us a little about yourselves? How did you get here?
Well, yeah, I'd be happy to. So I started with computers back around 1990. It was an Atari ST, so it was kind of like a poor
I had
man's
one of those as well.
Macintosh
Yes, the
in a lot
1040
of
SD.
ways.
Loved it.
Yeah, I loved it. So I started programming on that, making apps and games and playing apps and playing games and using apps. And from there, I progressed to Windows for a while. I made a bunch of apps on Windows that were quite popular. At that time, it was shareware. So, I was sending them out for free, and they were featured on the cover discs of magazines all around the world, which was kind of wild. I would upload them to Version Tracker, and people would download them.
Yeah.
It was a different world. It really was. Around about the late 90s, I was working in design, and I was using Macs at work, but I was still had a PC at home. And then slowly over the next handful of years, I transitioned to using a Mac myself full time. iPod, and from that point, I made apps just for Mac.
And so this is, I mean, you were working for design agencies. Were you doing design for them or like interactive stuff?
Yeah, I guess you could call it interactive. I mean, it's web technology. So
Right.
I went into design agencies. The first one I discovered from their URL on the back of a CD, and got in touch with them and ended up working for them, doing websites, interactive, flashy things, dynamic HTML when that was a kind of buzzword. Just building apps for bands, for record companies, for design agencies,
This sounds
photographers,
kind of
things
living the
like that.
life. This is in London.
Yeah, London. Yeah,
Yeah, I was gonna say this
it
sounds
was.
like
It was.
kind of living the life.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun. I'm 49 now, and at that time it was my early 20s, so it was it was really fun. London was a great place to be at that age, and it was, you know, work hard, play hard, I guess you could call it. We did a lot of things together as a company,
Hmm.
as colleagues. We would just go to exhibitions and go to. I remember one which was the photographer Rankin. We built his website. He's a fashion kind of magazine photographer, and he had this exhibition launching his latest catalog of work. And I went there, and I didn't really think much about who I might meet there, but I think Kylie Minogue was there, and Natalie
Oh.
Imbruglia, and Damon Albarn, and so it was
Yeah.
kind of the who's who of who he'd photographed, and I was a little bit awestruck at that point because
Right.
it was just me on a computer, really.
Yeah, I mean, it was. We didn't have quite that level of it. I do remember a very long time ago when we were living in Seattle in the early '90s, mid '90s, I guess. My friend Glenn Fleischman had
Mm.
a web hosting company, and we actually hosted. He hosted the first uh, video that was actually broadcast over the internet. And the It was Party Girl was the movie, and with
Mm.
Parker Posey, and she
Yeah,
came, and then NBC News came, and it was just kind of this like, I can't believe we're here. And
yeah,
the like what this geeky stuff we're doing has somehow captured the attention, or like it was at that point it was more like the mainstream was like, aren't you cute? Kind of like, isn't this funny that this is happening? And indeed, like, it was a postage stamp movie. So we're
sure,
not talking
sure.
Netflix, but it was again the first one that had happened.
I think at
So
that time
yeah,
it's almost critical mass, but it's not quite critical mass. So
yeah,
a lot of people are finding it really interesting and thinking, oh, what's going on over here in this little niche? But not long after that, it really became critical mass, and
yeah.
I moved to a larger digital media agency, and then did some freelancing, and then before I knew it, I ended up working at Apple. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So what were you? How did you end up there, and what did you end up doing?
So in London at that time, there was this thing called pub standards where web developers would meet up once a month at the pub and just have a drink and a chat and talk about what we were doing, what was going on in the industry, what was going on in the world, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I met a lot of cool people there, including a guy who was a technology evangelist at Apple for the Safari app.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked, and people at different museums and galleries and things like that were always contacting him about, oh, how can we get somebody to make the best kind of mobile responsive website or that kind of thing. And, he, as a technology evangelist, he can't do that, but he was going around trying to find the people that he could link up with those companies. So I did a
Mm-hmm.
website for the Institute of Contemporary Arts, um, which was a really cool, fun little project. In those times where a lot of people were building websites that kind of looked a little bit like an app. There
Yeah.
was a um, some kind of CSS framework that you could use to make it look like early iOS. And he remembered me. When the iPhone came out, I was going to WWDC and had started programming for iPhone. And I ran into him there. And he was like, oh, well, what are you doing here? And I told him what I was doing. He's like, oh, okay, cool. And then more years went by, and I just got an email out of the blue from Apple saying, hey, would you be interested in this role of technology evangelist for web technologies? I was
Okay.
like, okay. So I went to see them, and it turned out to be going to ad agencies or creative agencies, teaching them how to make creatives for use in iAd, Apple's ad platform, and game developers for how they could integrate those things in their games.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of half a teaching role, half a hands-on programming role.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked it. I remember going to Germany one time, and and we had a chat, and they were like, "Well, how do we do this?" I was like, "Well, let's just go and do it." So, I sat at someone's desk, and off
Right.
we
Like,
did, and we
we'll
did
do it
it. And
now. Yeah. Right.
yeah, there's like a crowd of people around, and we just built something out quickly. Not by any means the final thing, but it was.
Yeah.
I- I'm a big into rapid prototyping and getting the ideas down as fast as possible to prove either that they're fun or that they work or whatever. And that's kind of what we did that day. We just got something working, and I went away, and they were happy, and they built some really cool stuff after I'd left. So I think it did empower them to use the latest
So
technologies.
So it sounds like the technology evangelist job is really about saying, hey, Safari and the platforms in general, Mac and Mac OS and iOS, can do this stuff, which you may not realize.
Mm,
And not only are we going to tell you that it can do them, but we're going to help like show you how you can take advantage of them because that makes us all look good. Is
absolutely.
that
Yeah. I
fair?
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. You're bang on. I think we know about this stuff because we live and breathe it, but
Yeah.
uh, people in ad agencies, they don't really have time to do all of that reading to to stay abreast of the latest technologies. So they just need a little push, a little bit of guidance, a little bit of help to break down the wall and just to give them the answers so they don't have to go to find them. That's the
Now,
most.
do you know if Apple is still doing this? Be-
Yeah, I mean,
and I say that
yeah, they. I mean, I don't work there. I haven't worked there for 10 years now, but
Yeah.
they they do they have developer relations team.
Yeah.
They have technology evangelists for almost every product. I would say they have design evangelists. They have, I know people who are doing it for Vision OS. That people are still doing it for Safari. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
It used to be, I mean, again, sort of back in the day, it felt like Apple was much more public about how they would involve people in there were kitchens, they would have feedback sessions with users,
Mm,
they do, user testing, and that you would hear about that.
mm,
And I can't quite remember when it was, but it's been a while. And since I remember anyone saying, "Oh yeah, I went to Apple and participated in this thing where they were interested in how we use something new," or
mm.
or a kitchen was held where developers could come and do that. And maybe they've just sort of brought it more internal, and so it's not like leaking out into the broader world. And that, I guess, I would hope that's the case. But
Yeah,
I was
I think
worried that with some of these things that have been happening, maybe they're not paying as much attention.
I mean I do worry about it a little bit, but I think things just change. You know, I remember going to Berlin for kind of like a mini WWDC. They did a few around Europe, and the Berlin one was really cool. I got to meet Quinn, the Eskimo.
Quinn's great. I
Yeah,
love Quinn.
yeah.
See,
So
I saw
that was
him,
a
I
bit,
guess, last in 2018.
yeah,
So
that
when
was a
we were in London.
really big thing for me to finally meet him because I'd read the name so much, you know.
So Quinn
Yeah.
actually stayed at our house.
Oh
We've
wow.
known Quinn for a very long time. Because back in 1993 it was Peter Lewis, who wrote
Mm,
Anarchy and numerous other things, now is well known for Keyboard Maestro.
mm,
I knew him on the internet, and we were chatting in email. And he said, "Oh, I knew he was in Australia. He said, I'm coming to the U.S. for a conference. I think it was Mactivity or something like
mm.
that. I forget exactly. Are you going to this conference?" I was like, no, I'm sorry. I have to go to this other one. And then came the throwaway social invitation, but which is, I did not.
Okay.
Beware what you say to Australians. I was like, but if you're in Seattle, you're more than welcome to come stay with us. And the next message, I wasn't really expecting anything because the conference he was going to was in California. And the next message was, "How's July 12th through 17th?" And, and went into the other room. It's like, "Tanya, I think I've invited someone we don't know to stay with us for 5 days." And again, same thing. We were 22, something like that,
Yeah,
23.
yeah.
And so he came, he was the ultimate guest. And it turned out that he and his college friends, who included Quinn, had long college conversations about like how you would be the ultimate guest. And so
Oh
like we'd
wow.
wake up every morning and the fold out couch was put back. All of his stuff was in his suitcase. And he'd be like sitting on the couch reading a book and like, "So what are we up to today?" And so we
Amazing.
once we had a great time with Peter, but that made us the stop for all Australians.
Mm,
And
mm,
so the next year after WWDC, Quinn came. And he came and he was in the middle of applying for the job at Apple. And so he comes and he's like, "I need to fax something. Do you have a fax machine?" And we didn't. It was like, "But this is back in the day, we'd go to Kinko's. It's like, okay, we go to Kinko's.
Mm.
And so I still remember he kind of came in, like, this is, we're talking about this like in the car, and he comes and he puts his backpack down. It's one of those compression strap backpacks, and he
Uh,
literally explodes it. Like the stuff goes everywhere because what he needs to fax to Apple, he just learned he
okay.
needs to get this paper in right away, is at the bottom of the backpack. He explodes his backpack. We pop back in the car, drive to Kinko's, fax in the thing. And long story short,
Amazing.
he gets the job at Apple and becomes Quinn the Eskimo in DTS, and
Yeah, yeah,
makes the world a better place for innumerable developers. So,
absolutely. In fact, I got a reply from him recently about one of the apps I was trying to get approved, and I got there in the end. But you know, his advice there was invaluable, as it always
yeah,
is. You know.
yeah.
Mm,
Quinn knows so much deep knowledge in the Mac. So,
mm,
any
mm,
event,
mm.
why don't we move on to look at some of your apps?
Okay, yeah.
Because as I said, so many of them, and and you know, there, as I said, there's 18 apps. We'll go through them, but why now? What's sort of come up that you suddenly have released 18 apps?
So I think the oldest one of these is probably like maybe 8 years old. Um, I made most of them to scratch an itch to
Mm-hmm.
solve a problem for myself, and then just carried on using them. But for me, uh, it's actually quite difficult to launch an app. You know, not only have you got to go through the kind of gatekeeper app store review, but just all the promotional material. You have to create a website. It's like when I think the app is finished, there's still a lot more to do. So
Which,
I could,
yeah.
yeah, I could never, I just thought, I just can't, I just don't really want to do that, you know? So all of these apps kind of just built up over time. And then I was talking to a friend of mine, Jason, recently. He's an app developer, also ex-Apple. And, he's like, why haven't you released any of these? And it's like, yeah, I don't really have a good excuse anymore, you know? So
Right.
I then had this crazy idea. Okay, I've got all of these apps that I've created. I don't really want to do more than one launch because it's so much effort. Why
Right.
don't I launch them all on the same day? And now
There's
that
some
I'm
economies in scale in that. Yeah.
yeah,
You know.
now that I'm actually at the final hurdle, I think it's a preposterous, ridiculous idea. Nobody should do it. But it's too late now for me. I've done it. So yeah, I had to build a system that put the kind of builds a website from screenshots and app descriptions and some markdown files. So that's
Right.
a kind of one-step process. So that's its own little app in a way. Um, and that's the idea. The idea then became give them all kind of matching thematic icons and treat them all in a very similar way. And here we are. Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, because these were itch scratching apps, I suspect
Mm.
that they did not have, nicely designed icons, and probably you went in and cleaned up little bits and pieces because it was just for you in the past.
Yeah, yeah. I think the first icon that was in this style was from my pixel art app Dotty, which is kind of a kind of face that might remind you in some ways
Hmm?
of the Happy Mac. But the constituent parts of that face are kind of abstract versions of the letters in the name of the app, DOTIE.
Mm-hmm.
Um, After I created that one, I then created the others in a similar style with like black key lines and pastel kind of colors. As well as that, some apps did require me to give them that kind of final polish, final pass, because they were ready for
Can
me,
you?
but to be ready for everybody is a different
Yeah.
thing.
Can you share your screen so we can see the
Yeah,
wall of
yeah, yeah.
apps page, and so people can see what these look like?
Here we go then. Can you
Okay.
see it?
Yes,
You
I
got it?
can. Perfect.
So yeah, so it's interesting because if I've got a little I can use Alfred to toggle the appearance, and you can see that it works in light and
Mm-hmm.
dark mode. And all of the screenshots of each app have been captured in light and dark mode as well. So I've tried to give everything my typical kind of attention to detail. Um, so yeah, I won't do that again.
Yeah, I was
So
gonna
yeah,
say
so
I really liked I mean the flipping through the apps. You very much have there's a nice design aesthetic to the site. It's
mm,
simple but effective, and kind of you can see what each app does. Um,
mm.
why don't we just sort of go through them alphabetically for lack of
Yeah,
any
okay.
other thing, and just say tell us, like, I didn't like Barfly. What is itch.io? I don't know what itch.io is.
Okay,
So.
so I mean, as you've probably gathered, each of these apps, because I built them to scratch and itch, they all have kind of a little story behind them. And itch.io is a website where game developers, usually independent or indie game developers, can release their games. It's kind of like Steam,
Mm.
but
Okay.
for indie games. And normally you just get a download from there, so nothing's got DRM or anything like that on it. So I've got tons of games on there that I've created over the years, and I kind of like to know, are they being downloaded? Are they being bought? Are people looking at them? So this is
Mm-hmm.
an app. It's one of a few apps that started as a script, an X bar script. X bar is
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a menu bar app that you
Right.
can run scripts in. And if your script outputs a certain thing, it appears in the menu bar. Um, I decided to make that a native app. So all as it does is reports on what's going on your itch page, basically. Refreshes every hour, gives you information. You can click on any of these game names and it will take you to the detail page. So it's just a kind of notification app in a lot of ways. But
Right.
it's just fun for me to see, oh wow, okay, today, many people are downloading this particular game. I wonder what's going on there. That might prompt me to maybe search the news or have a look at
Mm.
my referrals to see what's going on. So that's
And
kind of for independent game developers, really, that one.
right. So Brutify looks like it's more of a utility for like design, web designers
Mm,
and
mm.
people who are care deeply about their image size.
That's it. I think the reason I built this one is that there is another app like this. In fact, there are many apps like this. Image Optim is probably the most well known, but for a long
Mm-hmm.
time, and I think even still today, Image Optim isn't Apple Silicon ready.
Oh,
So
really?
all of the tools that it calls behind the scenes are still Intel tools. So, the writing's on the wall for that, as we all know. So I thought, okay, well, I think it's probably about time that I put in some legwork and make my own take on that kind of concept. You drop a PNG on it, it brute forces through all of the different PNG options and keeps the combination with the smallest file size. That's essentially what it does. And you can ask it to take a shorter time or a longer time to do it. Um, I think it's maybe a bit of a lost art that people spend that much time optimizing images for
it,
websites anymore.
it
But yeah,
it's true. And I mean, on the one hand, I think people don't do it and they don't think about
mm,
it. But boy, there are times every now and then when you're in a low bandwidth situation and a site is loading really slowly and you think, oh my goodness, what is on here?
mm, mm, mm.
And but this also, I get the impression from something I read stuff I read in your site that this is almost a philosophical thing with you. I mean, like your apps
Oh,
are
absolutely.
small too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I started with the Atari ST, it was a floppy disk, and your apps they couldn't be larger than a megabyte. You know,
Yeah,
now to
800K
download an
floppies,
app
and
and
that
have it,
can
yeah,
sounds it was
to
crazy.
download I don't know, an Electron app or something like that, and it's automatically 300 megabytes. It kind of blows my mind. So I remember a funny story about one of the apps that I made before I was working at Apple. I made with my best friend Dave, and he did the programming. I did the design at that point, and we optimized all of the assets that were in the app, and we shipped an app that worked on iPhone, worked on iPad, and I think it was like 4 MB or something like that at the time,
Right.
so
Right.
and it was, a fully universal app that worked across all of this, and only because I put the effort in to
Yeah.
optimize the PNG files at that point. Most of the assets were PNGs. Um, yeah. So yeah,
It
I
is.
just to talk a little bit more about the structure of each
Oh yeah.
page. This is not a final screenshot, but you'll have like a buy button, the screenshots, maybe sometimes in a carousel, pullouts of the major features, then a full list of features. And if there are apps that are comparable, then I will try to compare them in an honest way, and with this one, I run more tools, I do more things, and still my
Hmm.
app is smaller than the competition. So yeah, it's kind of very much my philosophy. One of the games that I made was 39 kilobytes, but featured 2 songs, physics system, high score system, particle system, and it became famous for that reason, really. And it eventually,
This was on the play date, right?
yeah, yeah,
What's a
yeah.
Panex little game thing?
Yeah, it's kind of like a modern Game Boy, I would call it. Black and white screen, a little bit like the classic Mac in some ways.
I'm a little too
Mm.
old for the Game Boy, but I mean, for me, video games were the Atari 2600.
Yeah, yeah.
And with those cartridges that you'd pop in, and it was the same thing. I mean, these I actually have no idea how big those games could be, but I think it was, 8 kilobytes or 16 kilobytes or something. It was
Mm.
insanely small how they could,
Mm.
how big they could be. And yet, as with the adventure game, with the dragons that looked like ducks, and you were a square
Mm.
moving around the screen, it was
Yeah,
the gameplay was still insane. I mean, it was
that's
fabulous.
it.
And so,
I
it
think
really doesn't need to be huge.
no, I think these days the pitfall, and it's easy because it's so convenient to pull in a dependency, to pull in a framework, to pull in a pre-built set of tools into your app to do a particular thing for you. But I think it's a kind of false economy because you might pull in a framework and then only use a tiny fraction of it when
Yeah.
more than that is being added to your app. So it's easy to use those things, but I think philosophically, like almost none of my apps use any dependencies at all. Only one of them, which is needed a web server, and I didn't want to have to write a web server, so I
Right.
pull in I pull in a web server. But that's the only thing I can really think of. Brutify calls in a bunch of CLI tools, but almost every other app is
Completely
framework less.
standalone. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how I
Let's
achieved the small sizes.
let's move on to Ditto. Ditto, look, I mean,
Mm,
I don't need to do a ton of translation, but I love the concept.
mm. I mean, for me, I'm into Japanese culture, and so I browse a lot of Japanese sites, but I can't read Japanese, so I'm often wanting to do a quick translation. So with this one,
Okay.
you copy the text twice into the clipboard, and it pops up a window and translates that text for you. So it's kind of a quick way to do that translation. Now, the Alfred is the first app that I saw that allowed you to do that double copy kind of thing to trigger something.
Mm-hmm.
DeepL translator app also does it, but these apps do a lot more. And the DeepL app in particular is a bit of a monster and not really friendly to use. So again, for me, it was just being annoyed with something that I was already using and deciding to um, solve that problem in my own particular way. So
Yeah.
this app
Yeah. Well,
is less than 1 MB. So this is one of my fits on a floppy apps. So that's 368 kilobytes. It's kind of crazy how much you can do in so little code if you just think about it. If you just put it
yeah.
as a constraint, you don't need to kill yourself about it or really give yourself a hard time. But if you just keep it in the back of your mind, oh, okay, this is kind of what I'm going for, then it kind of takes care of itself in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's a
and
cool app. I use that a lot.
and I could, certainly there, well, oh, a couple of megabytes here and there is one thing, but there is a big difference between 1 megabyte and 320 megabytes for
Mm,
DPAL.
mm,
So,
mm.
that's actually significant.
Yeah.
As you start to run into your
Especially
titles.
if these apps are apps that you have launching on login.
Yes.
My login is so fast now because I don't use any apps that are that kind of size, you know. So
Yeah.
it's kind of astonishing how much quicker your computer can boot up and log in when you're using apps that are respecting your system.
I've been thinking about this a little bit more recently because of all the Apple 50th anniversary stuff that's been going on. So we've been talking about Steve Wozniak,
Mm,
who, I mean, famously for him, everything was about optimization. How many
mm,
fewer chips can he use? How much more tightly can he write this code? And as I said, it does feel as though Apple in general has kind of lost that attitude, but it certainly was there in the early days, in
mm,
terms of, we had these incredible constraints and you could
mm.
do amazing stuff while honoring those constraints.
Yeah, I think it is quite an old school approach to even be worried about that kind of stuff, especially when you have a system disk that is terabytes of space.
Yeah.
You kind of don't really need to think about those things. But I think if you do consider them, everyone wins.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth
And,
doing.
and it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be, oh, we shrink everything to the smallest possible size, but simply why are we
Mm,
doing this approach to things? We
mm,
can just shrink it
mm.
some.
Yeah, just ask
So,
yourself a question every now and again. It's like, okay, I could do this, but what if I do this?
yeah.
So the next
So
app is
Dottie,
Dotty.
this is
Yeah, so it's
back
kind
to
of
the
my
original days in
it,
some ways. Is this Mac Paint?
it's kind of my Mac Paint. Yeah. Um, it's inspired by a lot of things. There's a pixel art app that I used to use called Piskel. There's obviously Mac Paint. There's Acorn by my friend
Mm-hmm.
Gus. But a lot of these apps don't do the particular type of pixel work that I want to do. The most obvious thing is dithering. This app
Mm-hmm.
has dithering as a kind of primary function of the app. It's baked into every tool. So you can set the dither, and then whenever you draw or fill or paint or erase, it it respects the dither setting. So that is actually something that was done on Japanese pixel art apps. And I'm
Mm.
kind of obsessed with pixel art apps, specifically those from Japan, because they did things in a way that we were kind of oblivious to. If you talk to
Mm-hmm.
Mark Ferrari, who did a lot of pixel art on the Amiga for Electronic Arts and Lucasfilm, and um, he did all his dithering either automated by getting an image to dither a full color thing, or by painting the pixels one by one. And
Wow.
for
Yeah.
me, that's like, I could never believe that that was the best way to do it. And of course, in Japan, they didn't do it that way. They did it the way that my app does it, by having dithering as a property of the tool rather than something you do as an afterthought. So
Right.
that's where I started with this, and then I just kind of had a lot of fun thinking up new things to add. So in the palette section, you can create blends between colors, and it will create all of those intermediary colors. You can have different ways of working with selections, working with the
Mm-hmm.
brushes. It's For me, it was just, I mean, it's actually the most complicated app I've ever built. So
Yeah, I was gonna say
it's,
this looks quite
yeah,
a bit more than all the rest of them.
yeah, and it's kind of one of the few apps where I think, oh, really, I would like to kind of reboot certain aspects of it because it's become a little bit unwieldy. But um, it does what I need. There's a guy in Japan that uses it for all his work, which is cool. But it's only in test flight at the moment because I need to speed up certain aspects of it. It's all
Hmm.
Swift, and that's kind of great, but also kind of bad for performance in some ways.
Got it.
So I need to take another look at certain things. So that'll come out on test flight, but it's a little bit way off having a final release, I would
The
think.
fun
But
release.
it's fun.
Okay.
It's fun, and I've tried to make this page a little bit different. That I want it to kind of look
Yeah, I
more
saw
like
that. It
a
was explaining it a
more
little bit
fun,
more.
yeah, more like a kind of magazine that you might open up and discover pixel art for the first time. So that's kind of the
Yeah.
idea there.
All right.
The next one,
Drive away.
yeah, this was another XWAR script that I created, usually as Python script, but then decided to make it into a native app. This one took a bit of work to be able to do what it does whilst still qualifying for the App Store. So that's kind of another hurdle that you have to jump through these days. But it will clean all of these kind of different files off your SD cards or external disks that you might be using in another
Right, and this is a
computer. Yeah.
big deal if you're going to give something to, say, a Windows or a Linux
Mm,
user,
mm,
and they're going to see all this Macintosh crud, which we normally don't see because it's invisible.
that's it. For me, there were two use cases for this. One was the SD card that I put in my car with music files on. My
Hmm.
car kind of freaks out if any of those files are on there.
Is trying to
And
play DS Store.
yeah, it's trying to play the dot files and it's like losing its mind. And then I have like handheld game machines that take SD cards of files as well, and they don't really like them either. So they're the main use cases for me. But it's interesting because it will also eject optical discs without doing anything to them. It will eject disk images. It will do a bunch of stuff that, you know, and I'm using SF symbols to get the kind of right symbol for the type of drive that it's noticed. And I try
Hmm.
to do everything the correct way, so it subscribes to system notifications to understand when a disk has been inserted or mounted, rather than doing things the kind of old school way of just constantly checking polling over and over.
Right,
So
right, right,
I try to
right.
do things the Mac way, really.
Hmm. Okay,
Um,
EQer. I
mm,
actually, I'm not much of an audio person, so I didn't intentionally understand. I didn't understand this one in a big way. Tell me what the
okay,
utility of this one is.
so this one, you know, we're both wearing AirPods. The AirPods Pro have a feature that you can take a hearing test on your iPhone, and then when you activate the option, it will adjust the EQ of the music to counteract any hearing loss that you have. And
Oh,
that for
okay,
me
yeah.
is a game changer because I actually have some hearing loss. The treble end of things I don't hear too well.
Mm.
So I use that feature on my iPhone and I love it. It has enabled me to hear the music as I used to hear it back in my younger days. And I think Apple allow you to do that on Mac OS, but only if you're using their headphones and only on maybe the most recent version of Mac OS. So
Oh, okay.
I couldn't use that. So I thought, well, I want that luxury when I'm just using my speakers or, you know, when I'm not using the Apple sanctioned
Mm-hmm.
stack. So that's what I set out to create. I take the audiogram data and I generate the
Oh,
opposite
nice.
curve, and everything sounds great through my
So
speakers,
basically,
you know, which is kind of
you're
cool.
running that hearing test, and that will output an audiogram, and so then you can just feed that into EQer, and that does
Yeah,
the right thing for all the
that's
other
it.
apps. Oh,
Hmm.
excellent. Okay, now I get
And
it. Very
you can
cool.
toggle it off by certain apps if you don't want it to touch those. You can. Uh, I had one tester complain that um, when they're on YouTube, some videos are loud, some videos are quiet. So I added this dynamic compression feature to the app.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a completely additional feature just for that, just for that one
Sure.
person. But I thought it was useful because you know it's something that I've encountered in the past. I would never really do anything about it, but um, because I had the structure of the app there, that was quite an easy thing to add. So I thought, well, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
I'll do that. So
And,
that one's
I mean,
yeah,
you do run into things that are very different volumes. So, yeah, it makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah. So that's pretty fun. You know, if you don't want to adjust it to your audiogram, then you can just use it as a normal graphic equalizer, and you can set it to a
Sure.
completely custom curve, or you can pick preset curves. So it's there's an app called Sound Source by Rogue Amoeba, and it
Yep.
does
Yep.
some of the things that my app does, but not the audiogram part. So
Right.
that was the core for me to create that. But if you look down at the bottom, Sound Source takes up 300 megabytes of RAM, and I could never really figure out like what's it doing with all of that RAM? You know, is it just keeping its interface around the whole time? It's quite a complicated interface, so I could see that maybe it would take up 300 megabytes of RAM, but I just for some reason I just don't get it really. And then my
Well,
app takes up a tenth of the RAM and less than 1 megabyte on disk. So
Paul Kafassis will undoubtedly hear this and we'll find out. So we'll
I, you know, I love those guys. I use so many of their apps. So,
they do such a great job. But
I don't mean anything by it. I think it's just friendly competition, isn't it? Really.
yeah. I
Um,
must admit, so feed edit,
mm,
I must admit,
mm.
I read as F edit because I go back to the days of when you actually were doing disk editing with F
Yeah,
edit, but I was like, oh,
yeah.
it's not feed. It's okay. So feed edit,
It's
RSS feed
yeah,
editing.
feed edit. I mean, it's funny you mention that. Given an app a name is the hardest part of the whole thing for me. I normally just give it the first name that pops into my mind, and then halfway through development, have to rename everything. Which in these days in Xcode is actually not too bad. It used to be an absolute nightmare to rename a project, but now it's okay. I've got it down to a T because I changed the names of these apps so many times over the course of development. This one, I kind of don't like the name, but I can't think of a better one. So it is what it is. And this one, my personal website is powered by an RSS. So the RSS feed is actually the content management system
Oh,
for
interesting.
my homepage,
Okay.
which is a very weird way to do things. But it's been that way for about 20 years, and I kind of don't want to change it at this point. So I used to use an app called, what's it called? Feeder to do this.
hmm
But I'm still running macOS 15 at this point, and Feeder has some issues with that, and I don't really want to upgrade to Tahoe. I don't want to buy the new version of Feeder. Um, so I made my own, and that's where this one's come from. But this is useful for people who do podcasts. They can create the podcast feed, you know. So there are other uses to it, but it's just for me, this one is like such a well-behaved Mac app. It has undo, redo. It has all of
Right.
the shortcut keys, accessibility. It behaves really well. It works really fast. It does exactly what it needs to. So I
I
now
was thinking.
when I release a new project, I add an item to this particular feed, and I type in the information. I press the Command P hotkey to publish it, and it's done. I can be in and out in 30 seconds. It's kind of wild.
I was actually I've been doing something doing some recordings for the local runners club, talking to people who were around 50 years ago when the club
Mm,
started, and initially I was thinking about kind of its an oral history, and like the transcripts would be more important, and it's why in some ways why I waited as long as we do because the AIs are pretty good at the transcripts now.
mm,
But what I've realized is that it's basically a podcast. And
mm.
so now I have, three of these files, and it would be nice to do a podcast feed. And I was like, oh, maybe feed edit will do it. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've got to look into that because I don't want to spin up something huge for. And this is not going to be, a big deal for me. I'm not going to do a ton of these a year or anything. So,
Yeah, this is it.
uh,
Yeah.
just I don't want to overload it in terms of how important the project is. But
I
all right,
pronounce it feed it, but
feed it.
it
Okay.
is such a it is such a bad name. I should really change it. but it's kind of too late now. It's already been approved on the App Store.
I was gonna say,
Um,
and I assume you changed the
yeah,
name in the App Store, and they're all over you in terms of, well, what's
yeah,
this? Are you trying to put something
yeah,
over on us?
yeah. So this next one, Hubble, is it's kind of like a USB diagnostic doctor kind of troubleshooting or just general interest
Yeah.
app. This came from an idea by Martian Wickery.
Hmm.
Um,
Who does
and
great
I
stuff.
think I think he's a Figma these days, but yeah, he put some mock-ups on his social media feeds, and I just thought, you know, I kind of want to build that. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, I've kind of built the prototype of the app that you mentioned, and he encouraged me to push forward with it. So I've added a whole bunch more stuff that wasn't in his mock-up. Basically, this allows you to see if you've got a drive connected or a peripheral connected. Is it connected optimally? Are you using the wrong cable? Is your USB hub slower than the devices that you've got connected to it? And it might
Wow.
encourage
Yeah.
you to improve your setup, basically. Mm.
Because yeah, I mean, you certainly on a modern Mac, you can end up with a hub and all these things kind of hanging off of it, and things plugged
Mm.
into your monitor, and right. I mean, I mean, we're not talking back in the days of SCSI where you had to know about the right terminators or everything, but certainly there are still issues with, are you using the right cable and plugging
Yeah,
things in the right order to not be hamstringing
that's it.
some
Yeah.
making something run a lot slower than it should. So
Well,
so
for
this will let
me,
you see topographically how everything's
mm,
connected.
mm. And for me on my setup, I realized that the caddy or the enclosure that I have my Time Machine disk in is slower than it needs to be.
Oh,
So that's
yeah,
kind of a bottleneck that I'll
right.
swap out at some point. Um, yeah, it figures out have you got too much plugged into a hub? Is a device throttled by uh, something upstream or the cable that you're using? Um, and
How can it tell
it's kind of
cables?
fun.
How do you understand the
So
cables?
most how do I describe it? Um, Through inference is probably the nicest way to describe it. But
Hmm.
all of this information is available in the IO kit USB kind of tree. The place that you might see that is in system information that
Hmm.
shows a subset of information there. But it doesn't make it obvious what's happening, what's going on. So a device might report itself as having limited speed, and then you can infer from that, okay, so what's at the other end of that connection? And you
Right.
can look at that speed, and then you can infer where the problem is, which end of the cable the problem is. So it
So I have
can't,
to ask th-
yeah.
then is because this sounds to me like, frankly, astronomy, where astronomers are constantly making pronouncements about things where you're like, how can you know that? And they're like, well, because the light shifts and blah blah blah. So is that where the name Hubble comes from?
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit, it's half that looking at things in a particular way, and half of it is a combination of the word hub, as in USB hub, and
Okay.
trouble. So
Hub trouble.
that's kind of where it comes from. But again, it's not the first name I had for this app. I think I originally called it, um, oh, what did I call it? I think I called it USB Atlas at first, which I don't, yeah, it
All
seemed
right.
right at the time. Um, but yeah, so you can't really figure out, is the actual cable the wrong
Right.
thing. That would require you to physically swap it out between devices of certain specifications in order to figure that out. But it will let you know which end of the cable um, is being slowed down, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you can see if there's something there. But okay.
And the data's there in the USB report, but the actual hardest part of this one was laying out the topology as a graph,
Mm,
um, and making sure that that reflected exactly the layout of. I mean, not it's never going to
right,
physically look like your desk, but it needs to show the correct hierarchy.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was really fun, and that one is just just below a megabyte. So. Mm. Oh,
All
yeah.
that, and it fits on a floppy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fits on a floppy. Yeah, the fits on a
Uh,
floppy is I've written this kind of manifesto of for small software because I really think more people should try to do it. And I don't mean that they should die by the sword or anything like that, but I think just trying to do it would probably teach you a few new tricks or open your eyes to a different way of working or just be fun,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
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 So
Um,
last
last.
dance. Yeah,
Yeah.
I won't
This
talk
is a
about this
bug.
too much.
I've never.
Yeah, there's
I've
a
never run into this.
there's a long standing bug. If you keep file sharing on all the time, and then I have my movies on an external disk, and sometimes if I go to bed, I want to watch a movie, and I would find that my shared folder was inaccessible, and it was actually Michael Sy that found the
Hmm.
root cause of this problem, and yeah, I figured out that if you disable uh, file sharing, reboot, re-enable file sharing, then it works. And I think Michael had figured that out, and I confirmed it. And I just thought there has to be an automated way to do this. This one can't be on the App Store because it uses uh, a certain way of switching that service, and it uses a helper basically. So
Right.
it can't
And
go in the
Apple's
App
not going to
Store,
allow
but
that.
yeah, but it's on GitHub, and it's really useful because you
And,
set it and forget it, and then you
right.
never run into that problem again. So it's fun.
And at some point, Apple might fix the bug, but okay,
Yeah.
localmost. I have to say this one was just I found hilarious. Putting a web browsers in your menu bar
Yeah, so for
or
me,
web servers in your menu bar.
so I build websites, I build web games, I build little tools that run in a web browser, and I don't want to fire up an app or start a command line server. So I just wanted my servers to just be really easy to start and stop and check on. So the menu bar seemed like the right place to go for that. And again, this is another one that started as an Xbar script. And then once I got to a point where it's like, okay, wow, this is really useful, and I think more people would find this useful. So I wrapped it up into a Mac app, and this is one where I do include a dependency, and it's the Hummingbird web server. So that's a web server
Mm-hmm.
written in Swift, which is really, really great open source project. Um, and yeah, it kind of does one thing really well. It's like all of my apps. I like to think that I go into the details and I really spend time on the details of these things.
So with this one, basically, you build your folder of HTML files, CSS, JSON,
Yeah.
whatever you're putting in there, and then you just drag the folder on, and that
hmm
opens it in your default browser.
Yeah, that's it.
Is it but running it locally? So you're not, yeah,
Yeah, it's running it locally. Running those kind of web files from a server allows you to do certain things that you can't do if you're just
yeah,
loading it from a file folder. So that's the point really. And um, you might want to check on your logs and make sure accesses are, but all of this stuff is just so fast, and it's such a better experience than opening up terminal and starting a web server there, and then having to remember to quit terminal and stuff. And all of these web servers, when you reboot, they come back up and they start again. So it's one of those things where once you've set it up, you can kind of forget about it, and
right.
that's what I'm all about, really. Yeah.
And these are only running locally, so there's no worry
Mm,
about someone connecting to them from the outside.
no. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, cool. All right,
So yeah,
Octoping. Octoping. What is
this
Octoblink?
is similar to the itch.io one, but
Oh,
it's for
right.
GitHub. So it just shows you all of your GitHub inbox in a menu bar. And the
Huh.
icons that I'm using are as close as I could find in the SF symbols equivalents to GitHub icons. So you can just see all of the stuff that's coming in for the projects that you own or are interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you can click on that and it will open up the GitHub website. If you're not interested in it, you can hold down Alt and click on it and it will mark it as red, so you don't even have to go to GitHub to manage
So just
those.
a really nice, fast way to see what's been
Mm,
going on with all the open source projects or the
yeah,
projects you're working on. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
nice. Okay.
It's just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
just a triage tool, really, and it gives you live notifications without you having to go to the app or on your phone or go to
Right.
the website
Right,
on
right.
your computer.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
this is the one paper trail. This is what I've been
Yeah.
working on for the last couple of weeks, trying to get this one in a place where it can launch. So because I work on so many different things over time, I have to have a way of managing what I'm doing, and that is by using an app on my Mac called Task Paper,
Mm-hmm.
and that's by Jesse Grosjean. And it's an amazing app, Task Paper, but there was no iOS version of it, and I just thought, okay, I need to make it. So
But there should be. So,
yeah, there should be. So I made a very, very quick version of it with the features that I use, which is basically just lists marking things as done and maybe giving
mm-hmm.
some things certain priorities. It's basically markdown with some bells and whistles on it, the task paper format.
Mm-hmm.
Then I opened it up to Jesse and the other people on his company's forum, Hogbay Software. And I then quickly realized that everybody else in the world uses task paper way more than I do. Like they use all of the features, and eh, folding is a big thing where you can fold up an outline into just the top level element or any of its children. And at that point I thought, oh no, what have I done? Because I found it really hard to build features that I actually don't use myself.
Yeah.
So it was a real big task, and I started this one in August of last year. And normally my projects only take a few weeks from start to finish. So for this one to have taken on and off, 6 months or whatever you want to call it, um, was more than I bargained for, really. But I'm really happy with it. It's probably the best app I've ever made, no question about it. Um,
And so this is simulating most of the features or all of the features of Task Paper in iOS then?
it started off with hardly any, but now it actually does them all and more.
Aha. Excellent.
Um, so yeah, so it was a struggle to get there. I'm not going to lie. Um, but I think the beauty of my approach to this on iOS, I have this accessory bar above the keyboard, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
horizontally scrolling. I call it the tool belt because I thought that was cool. Um, and you can scroll it along, and each of the tool icons on there, uh, either they're in a circle because they're a kind of one hit, or they're
Oh,
not in a
interesting.
circle. So yeah, I'm trying to differentiate between the two different types of tools. I'm not really 100% sold on that, but it's the only thing I
It,
could really come up with.
but it's an interesting point because this is something that I think Apple has been backsliding on a bit. But historically, when a menu command had an ellipsis at the end, it was going to
Mm,
bring up a dialogue. There was going to be more to do, as opposed to
mm,
it just acting on the selection or acting on its own.
mm,
And that little hint about what's coming next has
mm.
largely been going away,
Yeah, yeah.
and I like it. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, what people have commented on about this app is they love that the interface just completely stays out of the way. It's like,
Yeah.
I know Apple say it at the moment, but like the content is king, and that's their kind of reason for uh Tahoe. But
Yeah.
I don't really agree with that. But in this particular app, I have really adhered to that
Yeah.
philosophy.
Well, and I will say, I mean, I actually disagree fairly significantly with the content is king too, because,
Mm,
in my mind, most people who work on content do so with tools, and the tools are what's important because that's what they
mm,
use day in and day out, whereas the content
mm,
comes and goes.
mm,
Your content may change, and, that said, on the iPhone in particular, I was just happened to be doing some editing in a word processing document in a website the other day, and I mean, by the time the keyboard comes up, and you tap and select some stuff, you basically can't see anything. I mean, you're almost working
mm,
blind because everything is covering up what you're working on. So, I do agree on the iPhone, you need to pay a lot more attention to how much
mm.
space the tools occupy, or you
Yeah,
can't work.
yeah. So I've got some really cool stuff in this where you can mark an item as done. If you long press on the tool, it will
Mm.
mark it as done with a date stamp. You can swipe from the edges to open up the search filter. You can swipe from the other edge to drill into the different layers of the
Mm.
outline. Because people generally only work on one section of an outline at once, so they might want to just focus on just those few lines. So
Right.
it's got it all basically, and it, as I say, it has been really hard work to get it there, but I absolutely love it. I love using it. It's one of those things where I create it and I think, wow, did I really make this? You know,
This
because
actually works the way it should.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's so fun to
Yeah.
use, and I got some really good feedback. I had an amazing group of testers working on this one, so I had some really good feedback, great bug reports with video and sample files, and
Mm.
we worked so well together to actually whip it into shape. Um, yeah,
Mm.
I
Oh,
actually went
excellent.
to just this week. I went back to the Palm platform, and there were a couple of great
Hmm.
outline and apps on that. One was called Natara Bonsai,
Oh,
and the other
wow.
one was called Shadow Plan.
Okay.
But Bonsai in particular, that was a Palm app and a companion Windows app. That that app was amazing. It really was. So I
There was a
took a
there was a
couple of
point
things
when
that it could do.
outliners were all the
Mm,
rage back in the mid
mm,
90s. I mean,
mm.
oh, gosh, what was it? Think what when Dave Weiner started with an outliner, with an
Yeah,
outliner.
yeah.
But and I just
Userland,
remember
yeah.
that people kept doing these amazing things where you could use keyboard shortcuts to expand and collapse and move and
Mm.
hoist and yank, and they had all these great
Yeah,
terminologies.
yeah. So
Yeah,
so bonsai as hoist.
hoist, yeah.
I guess I guess you could describe one of my features as hoist, but really I should do more reading to find out if I actually uh fit the description exactly.
What exactly
Yeah.
hoist and
Yeah,
yank did.
what is it? Yeah. So bonsai was really good for me to use it after I'd pretty much finished mine and find a couple of cool things in bonsai that I've added. So one of them was a progress tag. So if I add a progress tag to a parent element, it will automatically update the value of progress based on the done
Oh,
status of
by how
children.
much has been
Yeah,
completed
yeah.
underneath. Oh, yeah, yeah, very cool.
And
Uh,
and you can also do a cost tag as well. And both of those aren't in task paper, but I wanted to add them to mine. Cost will do kind of simple spreadsheet sums, averages, min max of any
right.
values that you
That
put
you
in child
sub.
elements,
Yeah,
you
I mean, I
know.
think perhaps
That's
the
kind of fun.
idea, the popularity of the outliner was that so much information in the world, when you organize it, becomes hierarchical.
Mm,
And so if you can, you know, make the hierarchy smart, you can do
mm,
interesting things.
mm,
I mean, I sort of feel as though that entire approach to the world has somewhat fallen away. I mean, it was a little bit like,
mm,
we had Yahoo, which was, the directory of the internet, and then we go to Google, where it's like, we don't care, just search. everything became search. And so there's a little bit of an attitude switch there. But certainly for many projects and many ways many people's minds work, hierarchy still wins out. But all right,
Yeah, I mean, as I
seaports.
say,
Oh, sorry.
I generally use it just as a to-do list for myself, but I've made it for other people because they use more of it. I don't think any of my apps are will ever get kind of mass adoption or anything like that, but I
Yeah.
think enough of them will find their people,
All right, seaports.
So
Port inspector.
this
Ah.
is yeah, so lots of stuff that run on your Mac expose different web servers, even though you might not realize it. And sometimes if an app crashes or something, you can have this thing still running in the background and still taking up resources. And um, that happens a lot of the time for me. Um, so I just wanted another way to keep an eye on
Mm-hmm.
what was running in the background. And people, I think there are some other apps that do this kind of thing. I mean, Activity Viewer, sorry, will do it in some ways, but yeah,
Is
it's
there
just a very very niche little app, but developers would find it useful, essentially.
is there a security story with this as well in terms of what
Yeah,
is answering on your Mac?
yeah, this is the one that Quinn helped me with. So the first version of this, because I need to get this information from the system, the port number that's in use, the name of the process that owns it. I couldn't figure out how to do that until um, I put an exception or an exemption in the app, and I submitted it for approval, and they were like, "No, no." Uh, so I fired off to DTS, and of course it was Quinn that responded, and he's like, "Yeah, no, this is not going to happen, and you're going to have to find another way." So he recommended another way, but it wasn't something that I could do, not technically or philosophically, but it was just it wouldn't have got me the whole answer.
Mm-hmm.
So I just went back to the drawing board, and I ended up obtaining all of the information I need from multiple different sources, and
Oh,
that's how I
interesting.
eventually got
Mm-hmm.
there. Whereas
Right.
if they'd have allowed me the exemption, which was read only, um, I could have got it from one source. But in the end, I just had to go around the houses to get it. But this is the one Quinn helped me with. Yeah.
And so, for people who aren't unaware of this, the exemption basically you're saying that you wanted to get information from an Apple service that is not normally allowed. Is
Mm.
that
Mm.
purely in the apps for an App Store app, or is that true in general?
I think it's purely for an App Store app. One
Okay.
of my other, I think actually maybe the next. No, okay. One of my apps, I did get an exemption for. So it's not like they never approve those requests, but you really have to present good evidence that they should let you have it.
Right.
But the one that I got the exemption for is a bookmark manager and needs to check what pages you have open in your browser. And the
Right.
only reason I got that one is because Quinn had posted on the developer forums, if you want this, this is what you send us and we'll approve it.
Here's a
So
magic incantation
so
too.
it was, yeah, it was kind of pre-approved, that one, but I'm happy that they let me have it.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Since
yeah, next
until
one. Yeah, this one.
this looks just a simple little app. Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I think that more than the app, it's the widgets really that are fun. You've got a
Mm.
moon phase widget. You've got memorable dates widget, or maybe even just a single event widget. And it's just for me to remember the birthdays of my pets and kids and birthdays, and
Hmm.
you can attach an event to a calendar appointment. So this is a gig that I'm going to soon,
Hmm.
at the end of the month. So you can. it's just for me to be reminded about important information. But this is the oldest app. So this originally started, I don't even know on what iPhone, but I'll go to the next one. But it's it's was Objective-C. I had to port it to Swift. I had to
Oh wow, yeah.
change the widgets as Apple changed the way widgets work. I had to do all of that. So that's had a lot of work done to it over the 8 years since I created it. Um, but it's just again, won't be, all of these apps are going to be sold on the App Store, but that one in particular won't be expensive at all because it's the kind of app that I think a lot of people would find useful.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Spindle. So this one, I suspect there's more of a story because this. All right, does this get into
Mm.
your million Macintosh media
Oh yeah.
files?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of my side projects that I started in during the COVID lockdown was I'm into the Mac, obviously, and I'm into the classic Mac as well. And I wanted to find a particular type of app. It was actually a version of a card game that I wanted to find, a Japanese card game. And I thought somebody has to have made a version of that game for the classic Mac, but I couldn't prove it. So I started collecting old Japanese Macintosh cover discs, CDs, CD-ROMs from magazines, and um, I had to go around the houses to be able to index those discs and the file system, file names, and because I was buying so many of them during COVID, I think at this point I've got something like 500.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
I
So
was
you have an
having to,
entire collection of
yeah,
Macintosh
I've got
magazine
a big folder
Japanese.
of them. Yeah, I mean, hardly any of them came with a magazine. They were just loose
Oh, they
discs,
were just the
so
CDs. Okay.
they don't take up that much room. But I was dumping so many of them or ripping them, whatever phrase you use. I was having to do them one at a time, and I thought, why am I doing this? I've got two USB drives here. I could be using both of them at the same time, but the software I'm using doesn't allow me to do that. So that's why I created this one. And the interface for this duplicates as you add more drives. So you can see now it's got
Just
two drives.
expands. Yeah.
Yeah, but if I was to add 3 or 4 or 5, it would duplicate the interface, and I can rip multiple disks at the same time. Um, it's a very utilitarian kind of looking app, but um, I think it's laid out well. I think it does the job. I actually designed the interface for this one in a spreadsheet, which is a pretty weird way of designing interfaces, but I wrote a blog post about that, about how and why I do it that way. Because for me, I can add rows and columns into a spreadsheet and sculpt the kind of hierarchy of the areas of the interface so quickly
Hmm. Yeah.
compared to Figma or whatever prototyping tool you want to use. So that's how I designed the interface for this one, and then I laid it out as a Swift UI grid. And interesting thing about this one is the progress text. I use monospaced digits, which is a trick that not many people know about, but it means that all numbers take up the same amount of space. So
Sure.
whenever
Yeah.
progress is changing a percentage, if you look at Finder, the text wobbles around a lot
Yeah.
as
Yes, of course,
because
because it's a
numbers are
monospace
different
or the.
widths. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
But in this, it's completely solid and
Completely
static, and
solid.
it looks beautiful. But it's just one
Would
of those small details that I go into.
would someone be able to use this to rip a collection of music CDs?
Yeah, it can rip music CDs. I don't know if I'd recommend it for that because perhaps iTunes might do a better job with error correction, or
Hmm.
there are certain weird things on old CDs that some people might have. There was this thing called preemphasis on CDs made in the 80s, um, where they would actually change the equalization of the audio on the disc, and your
Ooh,
hi-fi would undo
weird.
that change.
Huh.
And there's probably only maybe like 3 dozen discs that were ever made that way. But I've got some of them in my collection, and I don't think my software would cope with that, but iTunes does. Um,
Interesting. Hmm.
Yeah, so but it can rip them. It can rip all sorts. It can rip video CDs. It can rip, because it's just producing an ISO at the end of the day. It's producing or a bin.q
A disk
file.
image.
It's
Yeah.
it's not encoding video or anything like that. It's just for disk
Right.
images. Yeah.
Right. So tell me more about the Macintosh media files. I mean,
Mm,
you were buying these CDs from
yeah.
innumerable Japanese magazines. This is back probably in the 90s when basically everything had to come with a CD.
Well, this is it. That's
And
how
they
software was distributed.
right, because you could right
Before the internet.
there was no
Yeah.
real internet,
Yeah.
and if you wanted, there were bulletin boards, but those were slow, and so you
Mm,
could get a magazine. It would have 640 megabytes of
mm,
stuff on it,
yep. So,
and
uh, yeah, for me, I think it's kind of a kind of treasure trove of things that people think have been lost forever, but they're just sitting there inside of a disk image. And since I created my collection, I created a search engine that people can search by file name, so that people can find what's on my disks without downloading anything. And then they
hmm
can go on Internet Archive and download them, or they can go to Diskmaster to download individual files from inside of those disks. And it's people have found all sorts of things that they swore had been lost forever, and that's kind of cool. That's kind of fun. That's what the whole project was about. But I thought
yeah.
it shouldn't just be me looking for these things. It should be anyone who wants to spend their time doing that.
Have
So
Have you talked to the Computer History Museum about this?
no, I haven't. I mean,
I
I'm
wonder
I'm
if they'd
actually in
be
the
interested.
UK, so I feel a little bit
Yeah.
yeah, I feel a little bit distant from those guys. There's also some people in Japan. There's a game preservation society that I think
hmm
might be interested in that archive, but the copyright laws in Japan are kind of draconian in a lot of ways. Um,
Mm.
you can't reproduce files. You can't like I can request a photocopy from the library, but I can't view a scan of the same page online because their
Interesting.
copyright
Yeah.
laws don't allow it. So I think there is
The
lots of things that could be done with this data. Disk Masker is probably the best way to browse them. I don't think you can browse
hmm
just my disks through there, but you can find anything on one of my disks because they are all in there. And you can set up an RSS search for Disk Master so that anytime a file that you're interested in, maybe that features your name, comes up in one of the
Right.
disks, it will, uh, show up in your RSS reader. So there's
I
there's a
have
whole
to.
way to access this info, but yeah.
I'll have to. There's a guy who's a curator at the Computer History Museum named Hanson Su,
Mm, yeah.
who I haven't talked to him since he went there. I don't believe, but he was actually a grad student in information science at Cornell, here in
Mm,
Ithaca, and I had coffee with him once, and so I was like, I'll bet Hanson would be really interested in this. I've been slightly following his career ever since he
yeah.
graduated, and it ended up as this kind of this amazing job being a curator at the Computer History Museum. Again, he popped up in the Computer History Museum, just done a wonderful panel talk with David Pogue moderated with some early
Wow.
figures from the Mac and Apple worlds. So
I'll have to
he
watch
was
that.
heavily involved in that. But yeah, no, it's
Mm,
well worth it again. And partly it's for the stories that you don't know. Like
mm,
the guy who was the head of Apple Industrial Design who hired Johnny Ive. Like this goes
wow.
back, and so
Mm,
it's interesting stuff. But all right,
that's
moving
cool.
on to Stapler. And this is a like an inspiration from an old app, another one, isn't it?
Yeah, so I run System 7 still for certain things, and I run it on an iPad, which is kind of makes the iPad the ultimate classic Mac in my eyes,
Yeah,
um,
about the
because it's
right
so
size.
portable and you can get files in and out so easily these days with the internet and with Wi-Fi. One of the apps that I use on System 7 is this thing called Stapler, where it's just kind of like a folder of aliases, essentially.
hmm
Um, so you can put all the files that you're using for a particular task or piece of work. And then when you open up the stapler file, all of those files open up. so you can kind of compartmentalize your work in a lot of ways. I think it's an old school way of working, especially in the days with virtual desktops and
Yeah.
having multiple apps open at the same time is no big deal. But back in the day, this was the way that I would work on different things. It would quit all the apps that I don't need and open up all the ones that
Right.
I do
I
need.
mean, you couldn't leave everything open at once, and so
No,
you were in it building these work environments that you would
mm,
switch between as you worked on different,
that's
collections
it.
of apps. I remember there were a number of utilities that did things roughly along those lines. So,
What I should do is I should put years on this comparison table because
yes.
Patterson Softworks Stapler, which was with the original inspiration, I think that was around 92 maybe. And then there was something called Launch List. Oh, here we go. The dates are here. Launch List 2009. So that was kind of an OS 10
hmm
take on things by a Finnish guy. And um, then the PowerPC to Intel transition happened, and his app was never updated. And now obviously we've transitioned from Intel to Apple Silicon, and it's like, okay, I just kind of want an app like this, and I made it a couple of years ago, Stapler, and put it on GitHub, and so it's only now that I've made it App Store. I didn't have to change anything about it, but I'm going to
Right.
distribute it through the App Store
Make
rather
it
than
friendlier.
GitHub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I must say
Um,
this is probably the only one where in fact one of your comparisons is smaller, but it had you go back
yeah,
to 1992.
yeah, yeah. I had to go back to 1992. Yeah, and a single architecture. The thing about Stapler is this still includes um, Intel and Apple Silicon architecture in the binary. So I think by the time they stop allowing us to build for Intel, I think it will drop in size a little bit, but I don't think it will ever get to the classic Mac kind of size. Yeah, unfortunately. It's funny because probably about 150K of the app size is just the icon.
Yeah, right.
And it's like you need an icon, so
Right.
there's not really much you can do
and,
about
and
that.
that icon's a little bit more involved than some of the others. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
right.
So
All right.
that's a fun one. So yeah, so Sundoku is the Japanese phrase that means buying books and letting them stack up and not read them. So
I do that.
yeah,
I resemble that remark.
so it's one of those ones where I couldn't figure out a name for this app, and then I ran across this concept and I thought, oh, that's kind of perfect because this is an app for bookmarking web pages in
that you're never
that you
going to
were
read.
probably never going to revisit. Yeah. Um, I used to use a service called Pinboard, but I stopped using that. It kind of fell into disrepair, and I use one called LinkedIn now, which is a self-hosted open source thing. But I've added support for what I believe are the main bookmarking services. Maybe I've missed some. People have to let me know if there's any that I've missed.
I was going to say
But it just,
I've heard of Raindrop, but certainly not
yeah,
Charlie. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. So you can hit a hotkey, it pops up this window, pre-fills the URL and the title. You can then type in tags, which autocomplete from your existing tag
hmm
database, and then press an enter or command enter, and it will send it off to your service. And for me, this is another thing where I just need it to be quick. I need it to be frictionless. So hotkey, type it in, command enter,
Right.
gone. 10 seconds later, it's been bookmarked and I can carry on with what I was doing.
Know
This
that you'll
one,
never read it again.
yeah, this
Sorry.
is, I do search for them quite often. And
Okay.
one of the things about LinkedIn is that whatever you add to your bookmarks will automatically be sent to the Wayback Machine. So
Oh, nice. Okay.
by submitting it to your bookmark storage, you're automatically getting a copy of that on the Wayback Machine as well. So it's doubly useful in a lot of ways.
Right.
But with this one, I needed the entitlement to be able to interoperate with the browsers in a certain way. And
Yeah.
this was the one where Quinn had kind of gave everybody the script of how to access that. This one works with as many browsers as I could download. So it'll work with Chrome, with Perplexity Comet, with Safari Tech Preview, with Arc, with Dia, with, as many
There
browsers
are
as I could find, really.
It is fascinating because for the longest time there was basically Chrome and Firefox and
Mm,
Safari and it was something from Microsoft, some Edge thing, and maybe Ben Brave, and that was about it. And then about what 2-3 years ago, we just started to see this flowering of everyone decided they could do a browser,
mm,
and
mm.
now there's tons and tons of them. Vivaldi and
Yep.
yeah, I can't even think of all the names because like there were so many. I started to kind of shut down. I mean,
Yeah.
and now they're cloning each other. So like Zen browser is becoming a Firefox clone of Arc, and
Mm.
so yeah, there's
I
a ton of
I'm
them.
a I'm a big Safari nerd, like for me, Safari with its iCloud tabs and its interoperability with Safari on iPhone, for me that is
Hmm.
perfection. So I don't really use other browsers generally. Um, it was fairly easy to add a lot of the other browsers because essentially they're all just Chrome.
Right,
They're all
right. They're all
Chromium.
Chromium
So
browsers. Yeah.
yeah, so it wasn't too much hard work to get those added. Um, I've probably missed some. I've probably missed some bookmarking services, but this is the beauty of releasing an app like this is when people request other
Right.
things to be added, I can just add them, especially if
Right.
there are multiple people asking for a particular thing, then I'm happy to add it. I
Yeah.
just
All
noticed
right.
on this page, this one requires macOS Sonoma
Oh.
14.6 or later. That's because of one particular thing in Swift UI, but um, most of my apps are a whole variety of backwards compatibility. Some run as early as macOS 12.
Wow.
Um, uh, and there might even be some older than that. I'd have to do a search across
M-
my content.
m- Most of them are run Swift, correct? And when does Swift
Yep.
start?
Yeah. Mac OS 11, I believe. I'd have to check.
Okay. Yeah.
Di- I think it's early days. I mean, I actually love Swift and Swift UI in particular. I really enjoy, but I I think that the language itself it's kind of like I don't want to say this the wrong way. It kind of feels a little bit performative in terms of
Hmm.
the engineers are obviously really clever and they've got a lot of good ideas, but I actually don't think a language needs all of that stuff. I write
Hmm.
games in JavaScript. I write games in Lua. Lua I find amazing to write in because it doesn't have all of those things and it's fine. It can do
Yeah.
so much. So I think the constant churn of Swift is something that really annoys me, but I do enjoy Swift UI for being able to declare interfaces so easily.
Hmm.
But the problem with the early versions is they didn't have some things, so um, it's kind of similar to the my philosophy of not using dependencies and frameworks. It's you can use all the latest and greatest Swift things, but you will limit yourself to the latest version of
Right.
macOS. And I don't really see the point in that because it's like no one knows what you're using in your app. No one cares. It's
Right.
just you're just using the great new things to get a buzz or to live on the edge or whatever it is. But I don't think an app needs them. Um, SF symbols is another thing. They were introduced gradually, so there are some symbols that I really want to use that aren't available because they were introduced in a much later version of macOS, or there's some that I
Hmm.
want to use, but I'm trying to support an older version of macOS. So
And you
it's
can't embed
yeah.
those, or you don't want to embed
You
those?
could, but I don't really want to.
Right. The extra space
You,
for.
you well, but not that, but just maintenance really. If they decide,
Oh,
like
yeah.
they did with the gun emoji, that they change it into a water pistol or whatever, I don't, I just don't want to think about it. So
Sure.
I think it's me being awkward. No question about it. The fact that I want to support as old a Mac version as possible. And it's easy to check that thing. You just go into Xcode and you set the minimum target to an older version, and you just try and run it, and it tells you where it's going to break, and then I just make a decision. Is that okay? Should I resolve that bit where it breaks, or should I just set it to a
Mm-hmm.
later version of macOS? So I do it on a case by case basis for each app, but um, I definitely don't subscribe to having to use the latest language features, because for me that's just a distraction. I just want to make apps. I don't want
Yeah.
to do cartwheels around the latest language features. I just want to make the next idea. So that's it.
So the last item we have is Wavelet,
Mm.
a sound effect generator. And I suspect this is something for games in part?
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly
Mm.
game developers would use it, but people
Yeah.
who just want to generate fun sound effects would also use it. But this one, if I scroll
Teenagers.
down to the
It's
bottom,
young
yeah,
teenagers. Right.
there's Dr. Petter is the guy's name. That's kind of his alias, or
Mm-hmm.
his demo scene handle, I think it was back in the day. He created this thing called SFXer, and that was in Flash, I believe. Um, and then it was running only on Windows, so it would allow you to generate different types of sound effects. These kind of uh, in the top left of the window. These are the categories of sound effects you can generate. So then you can't really run his original so easy these days. So people made different versions in JavaScript and whatever else. And um, I was using one that was written in Lua for a long time, and I added a bunch of features to that version, but it still kind of didn't feel great to use it. And then I thought, okay, I'm just gonna make a native version. So I ported his original C code for the sound effects generator to Swift.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So I could be sure that it was accurate. Basically, that's the only reason I did that.
Right.
Um, and then I added the features that I'd added to the Lua version, which was this kind of history of previous sound effects that you've generated that you can go back to.
Mm-hmm.
But I made the history function better in this app. I was calling it Mac SFXer or SFXer Next or a whole bunch of names, but I emailed Dr. Petter, which obviously is not his real name, but I said, this is what I've built, and what do you think about the name? And he just said, I'd rather you didn't include SFXer
Mm.
anywhere in the name. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's a completely reasonable
Fair.
request. So then I had to think of a name. I put it out on social media, and I got some really good suggestions, including from uh, John Calhoun of Glider fame.
Oh my
Um,
goodness. Yes, there's a name from
yeah,
the
so,
past.
yeah, so we follow each other on social media, and he reached out with some names, and I kind of sat on it for a while, and then I came up with this Wavelet name, which kind of tick the box for me. As I say,
Yeah.
naming things I just find so difficult. It's enjoyable. I really enjoyed the trying to think of a name that achieves so many different things in one. Um, so I came up with Wavelet. I also added the ability to mix different clouds, so you can multi select different sounds, and then it will overlay them, and then you can adjust
Ooh.
whether they're stretched or offset or different volumes, and it generates then one combined sound effects of all of those others.
Yeah.
And that's cool. I actually think that the interface for this is, I've had this finished for a long time now, but when I came to look at getting things ready for launch, I thought this interface is not as good as it could be. So I wish I could stop this carousel, but I can't stop it, unfortunately. But the version with the mixed sound on the center part, here we see it is grayed out. So it's kind of irrelevant when you're mixing a sound. So what I want to do is make that completely disappear and have the mix take center stage. And instead of using little text fields with up and down arrows to adjust all of those things, it will be drag and drop, where you can just
Hmm.
move things around and arrange them and stretch them to mix the sound. And I think that'll be a lot more fun to use. But that's kind of for version 2, I think, of that one.
So I remember hearing, I think it was a podcast somewhere. They were talking about coming up with the sound for, I think it was a new, like, what do they call it, an audio logo or for Netflix. I guess it was
Okay.
changed relatively
Yeah.
recently, and
Mm.
and certainly there's like the on the Apple TV in particular, these apps. No, it's for Apple TV, of course, not for Netflix. And they were talking about just how kind of how would you be able to do that kind of audio logo in this? If you just want a sound that like the
Yeah, you
Macintosh
could.
bong.
The way it works is you generate a particular type of sound. So that might be a blip or a bleep or a crunch or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then using these sliders, you kind of sculpt the sound. So you might make it sound softer at the start or
Mm-hmm.
last longer or change its volume. You might give it a bit of wobble. There are lots of things you can do using these sliders. And then once you've done that with multiple sounds, then you can overlay them and mix them together. So you could definitely do something like that. I mean, I think it would be a pretty s- tight set of constraints to do it that way. I
Mm-hmm.
think it would be better to do it musically on a keyboard or in a proper DAW software. But you could do it in this, no question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
All
fun.
right. Why don't we shut off the screen sharing for a little bit, and then I have just a couple of questions after seeing all this. Um,
So
um,
just before I shut it off, this
okay,
was my
please.
manifesto for small software.
Yes.
So I've also bought the domain fitsonafloppy.com. So I think, or at least I hope, when people see this, they might not even be interested in any of my apps, but I think this manifesto or philosophy of let's go back to thinking about creating smaller software. And I don't mean everyone should try and fit it on a floppy disk, but it's just something to think about in the days of apps that weigh more than half a gigabyte that maybe we can think about things in a different way.
I was doing something like I accepted a calendar invite or something, and Outlook. I have Office because it's Office, and
Mm.
Outlook launched, and I was like, I don't use Outlook. I don't want Outlook. I went and looked at something like, I don't know, 1.2 gigabytes. I mean, why is this on my drive? Like this is
Mm.
not an app
Yeah.
I even use. Um, but I guess so. I think I know the answer to this, or I suspect I know what you're going to say. But I'm curious. Do you use any of the AI stuff? I mean, if nothing else,
So,
they can be useful for naming and just like
well,
brainstorming
yeah,
naming apps.
maybe I should use it for names. I think in at this point in time, can anyone truly say that they haven't used it? Like if I check something into GitHub, it automatically
Mm.
completes the commit message for me using
Right.
AI. And it's like, okay, so I don't really have much control about that one. Um, I played with it all. I I think if I didn't try new things or if I didn't grow with the times, then I'd still be writing software in BASIC, and
Yeah.
that's ridiculous.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
there are a couple of things I tried recently just to see, because I think it's easy to criticize anything, um, but I think you really should try the things that you're
Mm-hmm.
criticizing before you say anything about them. So for me to form any opinion, I've got to try it. So I bought a new router recently. It's a 4G router, so if my SIM card's in it, SMSs end up on the router, and I have to go into a web interface to view them. And that gets old fast. So I thought, well, it would be cool to have an app that would log into my router web admin and show me those messages. So I opened up a blank folder and I opened up Claude, and what did I say? I said, here's my web admin URL. Here's my username and password, which is just the standard router details. I want to be able to read my messages from the router. Go. 30 seconds later, it cracked the login system to get the cookie that is needed to stay logged in. 2 or 3 minutes after that, it had written a Python script to read the inbox, send a message, delete a message, read the outbox. And it was like, okay, there we go. And I was like, oh, okay, it's kind of done.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, well, let's see how far this can go. So I then said, okay, well, I want an iOS and the Mac OS app that share the same code to do the core functionality, but obviously have different interfaces. The Mac one will do slightly more in that it can send notifications whenever it sees new information. It can be in the menu bar permanently. How about that? And 8.5 minutes later, it had finished both apps.
Wow.
So the question for me at that point was, what does this really mean? It
A little bit of an
ran.
existential crisis there.
It ran, and it did what I asked of it, but it didn't look good.
Yeah.
It didn't work exactly how I would have made it if I'd have programmed it from scratch. So I spent the following 8 hours, the rest of the day, making it what I wanted. So there's a bit of a gulf there, isn't there, really? If you think that it took the computer 8 minutes to create 2 apps,
Yeah.
or like 2 targets for the same app, and it took me 8 hours to chisel it into the form that I was happy with. I don't, yeah. It
Would
raises
it
so many
have
questions. It raises so many
how long
questions.
do you think it would have taken if you had just started from scratch?
I wouldn't have done. And
Oh,
that's
okay.
the most important part. So I'm
Right.
glad you mentioned it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, I'm making a cup of tea or coffee or lying in bed, whatever, and you have an idle thought, oh, it would be cool to have an app to view those
Yeah.
messages. And that's as far as I ever would have gone with it, because I have no idea how I can hack the login for uh, a web admin page like that, so that would have been me falling at the first hurdle. So I think the important thing that I took away from it is that I never would have done that project. Never.
Right. Yeah.
I would have just struggled
So
on logging into the website every day, and.
I'm intrigued by this because for me, I'm not a developer. Um, I in high school when we got our first IBM PCs, literally the first IBM PCs, because I went to a school where we were next to an IBM plant, and
Mm.
so they gave us IBM PCs, and I started programming in BASIC and realized that I wasn't very good at it. Like I could do it, I always got my programs done. They always did. They were supposed to and whatnot, but it was not something that I was good at compared to even other people in my class that I knew.
Right.
And so I've never really done development, but I understand the concepts and I understand software from looking at innumerable apps over the years. And the closest I ever came was HyperCard. I loved HyperCard.
So good.
And so very recently, I've just started to get into, there's a guy named Charlie Garrison who has an app called Beyond Better, which is sort of middleware for the models, because it can touch code, it can touch files on your local disk, so you can have it intersect with Xcode locally, and then go out and use the models. And so I've been using that to build some little apps that again do exactly what I want.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
me, it's race timing, running race timing,
Yeah.
and workouts and things like that. And it's kind of brilliant because, as like you, I would never have done this otherwise. I
Mm.
don't have the skills, I don't have the tools, and but I tell it to go off and do something, and then I tell it, no, that's wrong. Here's how you need to do it, and we just keep going
Mm.
back and forth until it's. I won't say it's great, but it's what I want.
Mm.
Like I could imagine someone who, a designer, a serious programmer doing a better job, but it works and meets my needs. And that's kind of an interesting change,
It
that I
really
don't have
is.
to wait for someone else to build my
Yeah.
app.
And if you
So,
think about it, I think that's happened a few times in the past as well. Like
hmm
when I started on the Atari ST, I didn't program anything until I bought a magazine that had a programming tutorial in, and the programming
hmm
language was on a floppy disk. So it's like the tools were given to me that enabled me to get over that first hurdle. It's like, oh, okay, now I understand this, now I understand that,
yeah,
and then
yep,
even when I started, I mean, I'd made games forever, but there was a period of time where I hadn't made anything for a while because I wasn't happy with the tools that were available. And then a language called Blitz Basic came out. Originally, that was on the Amiga, but then a Windows version came out, and
hmm
eventually a Mac version. And that was around about mm, 2000, maybe, 2002. Um, and that was the point where it was like, okay, wow, the barrier has been broken down again. I can make whatever I want because I've got the right tool for the job. And it became accessible, whereas
yeah,
previously it wasn't accessible. And I mean, I love software. I love the Mac. And I think if people can do something where previously it would have stopped at the idea, then I mean, that's amazing. I think
yeah.
with the AI thing, there are philosophical and uh, moral questions to ask about it, um, and you see them in the press all the time. They're easy to believe. You know, you can read any headline about anything, and it's easy to believe. I think the task becomes for the individual to take that information and maybe prove that it's actually correct. You know, I know that there's one thing that goes around
hmm
about water usage of AI,
Yeah,
but it doesn't talk about the water usage on the iPhone production line, which dwarfs it. You know, so
yeah,
I think
right.
you've got to put things in perspective. I do agree that data shouldn't be stolen and uh, training data needs to be legitimate and um, people should think about the planet and all. I think about all of that stuff and I agree with all of that stuff. But I think there are bigger questions that this poses to us all that I don't know the answers to, and
Yeah,
the
that's
genie's out
absolutely
the
the case.
bottle, so we need to kind of figure it out.
Right. And I mean, I think the thing that there seems to be or it would be helpful if there was a need, if people would understand that there's a real difference between what the technology can do and what people do with it.
Mm,
That it isn't doing anything on its own. That
mm,
when we talk about AI isn't taking your job. It's a person who is saying that your job is no longer something we need you to do because we can use AI. So, like,
mm,
that's not AI's fault inherently. That's the businesses or the manager's fault.
mm,
And it does not seem to me a necessity that all jobs disappear because an AI can code something in 8 minutes. Like
Mm.
that doesn't that the two don't necessarily match up. That lots of businesses exist with incredible tools that we didn't used to have.
Mm.
And so it's going to be a lot of what people do, and how
Mm.
people see their role in working with other people.
Yeah, I think it's a tool at the end of the day. There's a couple more things that I wanted to mention just before
Yeah.
was maybe someone would generate an app to read the messages off the router and just release the thing that the AI pooped out, you know, but but for me that's not even an option because I have certain standards of the software that I create. And it sounds like you do
Yeah,
too.
clearly. Yeah.
If you spent ages hacking on your app, your running timer,
Yeah.
it's like I mean, I'm sure some people do just get something out of it and release it. But for me, that sounds absolutely terrifying because
There's clearly a
because
lot of bad software out there. So
I know
yes.
the effort that is needed to fine tune and hone software to work
Yeah.
to my standards, you know.
Yeah. And I mean, I said not so much as a developer, but certainly as a writer. Yeah, I can have AI write an article, but it will be lousy. And then I will, like when I write the article, and I will spend sometimes so much time getting the last few words, thoughts,
Mm.
the exact joke that I want to have, like getting that right. I'm in awe of some people like, John Gruber and Nick here because they can publish 4 or 5 things a day. I'm like, I just kind of struggle to get the one paragraph like exactly the way I want it,
Mm.
and I do, but it's not a quick process. It takes time and effort.
Yeah, yeah. I think
So
another thing is that there are so many things that need to change, that maybe should change in the world. I try and choose my words correctly. I don't mean should, or I don't mean that anyone should
would
or
be nice
needs to
if,
do anything. Yeah, it would be nice if, like, I make games and I never put guns in my games because
yeah,
I don't think the world needs more awareness of guns or more encouragement to shoot things. So that's my personal prerogative. I don't really sing
yeah.
and dance about it, but that's just how I build games.
I had a
So I
fascinating
think,
conversation
yeah.
years ago with Cory Doctorow, the science fiction author,
Mm, mm,
and he'd been writing for many years, and I think came and basically he married and had a child, and so he's a father, and he sort of realizes that he's writing this dystopian, kind of violent, unpleasant fiction in some cases. And he realizes that like this is in some ways not what he wants to be doing, that he wants to be having what he's writing give a little bit more sense of like hope for the future, or like we're working in the right direction. And I really appreciated that someone, an author who's going to continue writing for years and years, has that idea of, like this is my, like this is my philosophy, and I'm going to tell you about it. Like, like there
mm,
is a little bit of that it's useful to state that up front. So it's not just, oh, we're writing a happy book, happy little story.
mm,
It's that I could write a story where there was horrible, nasty, no good things, but I'm not going to,
mm.
because we don't need more of that in the world.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I
any event,
agree.
thank you for not having guns in your games.
And the one other thing that I want to mention was I wrote a blog post a while ago about an artist, Barbara Nessim, and
Hmm.
she's a fine artist, and she was one of the first artists to use computers to do well,
Mm-hmm.
one of the first fine artists to experiment with computers
Mm-hmm.
around about 1982, 1983.
Oh
So a
wow.
similar time
Okay. Yeah.
that Susan Kerr was working on icons for the Macintosh launch. So a similar kind of era. Barbara Nessim didn't have a computer of her own. Computers weren't really available then. So she went to a business that had a computer and they allowed her to use it out of hours. And it had a color graphic system that was kind of similar to teletext or video text. So it
Mm-hmm.
was very blocky, what I would call pixels, but in fact, she drew the art using vectors. But the display
Hmm.
was such low resolution that it looks like pixel art. And she said at the time, her art friends and her contemporaries said that she was wasting her time, that it was a fad, that computers would never be able to be used for design work. And she said that she heard that um, for about 10 years until Photoshop arrived in the
Mm-hmm.
early 90s, or at least broke through in the early 90s. And then she said people stopped saying that to her. And
Yeah.
it for me, it's an interesting story. There's one pull quote in my blog post that I got from one of the period magazines where they talk about the use of computers to do AI, um, in a funny way, like it's a naughty child or something like that. It's it's so strange to read it now because it's like, wow, were people really that up in arms about what was going on there using computers to do something that
Yeah.
previously had never been used to do computers? I think it's just, I'm not saying that it's a parallel or exactly the same thing, but I find it interesting to look back at something like that we now take for granted and think, how did we get there? You know?
Yeah. Well, and certainly we had, I mean, Paul Brainerd, who, came up with PageMaker. He died recently, and I remember back in those days, like people talking about, no, like paste up is where it's at. Like we have all of these skills, and and we can do amazing things, and this doesn't do as nearly as good a job. But it didn't take long before it took over, because it
Mm,
was in fact better. And
mm,
it's not to say that what people did before was bad or primitive or anything like that, but it's, the world moves on, the tools change,
mm.
the culture changes. So
It's made me think, like, what is the act of creation? Like if I make
yeah,
a game,
yeah.
what is the game? Is the game the rule set? Is it the feel? Is it like the design? It, because the code for me, I enjoy writing it.
Hmm.
I enjoy the
Yeah.
puzzle. That's for me is where I get the kick. But it is a laborious process. There's no question about it. It takes a lot of time. Um, but is the code the most enjoyable part of it for me? I don't think it is. I think creating something from nothing is the thrill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I I mean, again, not a programmer, but as a writer, and for me it's about making something that didn't previously exist. That that no one had previously had this thought set of experiences before. And that could be as simple as hopefully having an original thought in an article, or um, I as in the running world, I develop sort of running games and workouts and things like
Mm.
that. And one of the things I've done was, again, a COVID thing with FLRC challenge, and it's all about taking people to these 10 courses around the area, and they can run them as many times as they want. And we build a leaderboard and everything like that. And it was a vast amount of work, but I built something with friends, that I had to give help to make the leaderboard, and actually a company that does race registration and timing built features for me, in their system, but we then got 200 people who spent an entire almost a year running these courses, and I think they ran something like 21,000 miles for the year. And again, kind of slightly coming out of COVID, and it was life changing for people. And that is that concept that you brought this entire thing into being. That's where the thrill is. That
Yeah.
there's no one had ever done this before, and the tools had just barely appeared, and we could put them together in a way that suddenly made something happen. So yeah.
There's the musician Prince did an interview once, and he mentioned that he wanted kids to pick up an instrument, to pick up a guitar or to sit at a piano and to just play something, whatever it is, and to get that thrill of creating something from nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it for me.
Well, this has been wonderful.
Thanks so much. Had really a lot of fun.
I've enjoyed this so much. I had no idea where it was going to go, particularly at the end. And so I like that. We brought something into being that had not previously existed. And so thank you.
Thank you so
I don't
much.
quite know when this will go up. Are these apps available now? Available soon? I know the App Store is sometimes a bit of a black box.
Yeah, I'm still waiting on the app approval, but I will let you know because as soon as they're all approved, I will then set a date a week out from that to actually organize some things. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Thanks
we'll
so
probably
much.
wait until they are available, just so people don't have to, be on tenterhooks to be able to go play with some of these things. So wonderful.
Right.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Matt
Adam.
Sephton. Again, we will be back with another discussion, hopefully as good as this one, sometime soon. Thanks.
All right.